The United States just hit the pause button on the heavy tariffs it imposed. But is this peace or the calm before the storm? For 90 days, certain tariffs are on hold. But don't be fooled into thinking this is a surrender. It is not. This is a strategy. So is the US playing chess with the rest of the world? Are they pushing certain buttons to see how we'll react? Or are we watching a ticking trade time bomb? Let's break it all down. It's April 2nd, 2025. President Trump, never one to make a quiet entrance, declares the day Liberation Day.
In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. Reciprocal, that means they do it to us and we do it to them.
But no, this is not a celebration of any kind or a new national holiday with free burgers. This liberation was about freeing the land of the free from what he called unfair global trade deals. So, in typical Trump fashion, he dropped a tariff bombshell that shook the whole of Wall Street down to their coffee cups. He introduced a two-tier system, a universal 10% tariff on almost every country except, wait for it, Canada and Mexico. Who would have guessed? Trump also added reciprocal tariffs for about 60 other countries based on how unfair they were being. But then, in a shocking plot twist, on April 9th, the tariffs were suspended. Someone in the White House must have seen the stocks from Wall Street crashing faster than their coffee cups and whispered, maybe let's slow down. Yes, after the introduction of the tariffs, the stock markets worldwide were in complete disarray. Economic forecasts for the country were looking grim. S&P 500 was nosediving, and the GDP growth was running for cover. Trump hit the pause button with a dramatic 90-day suspension of the harsh tariffs. The 10% baseline still stands, but the extra reciprocal spice was temporarily shelved.
We're hearing that President Trump has announced that there will be a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs for all countries except China. He's saying, let's find out more from Simon Jack. What do we know, Simon?
The move was spun as a window for negotiation, but honestly, it felt a bit like the US stormed into the global trading party, flipped the table, saw the mess, and then awkwardly asked to talk about it. In February, President Trump decided to switch things up by slapping a 10% baseline tariff on all Chinese imports. Not one to back down, China retaliated with tariffs of their own, ranging from 10% to 15% on various U.S. goods, including coal, LNG, oil, and agricultural machinery. They even launched an antitrust probe into Google for good measure.
China announced retaliatory measures against the United States, including tariffs on coal, LNG, and crude oil, along with an antitrust probe into Google.
By March, things heated up. Trump cranked up the baseline tariff to 20%, and China retaliated with a 15% tariff on U.S. chicken and a 10% tariff on a whole range of other U.S. agricultural products. They also suspended U.S. lumber imports and revoked soybean import licenses for certain U.S. firms. Everyone was feeling the bite. On Liberation Day, China, once again, imposed a 34% tariff on all U.S. imports, effective April 10th. Just days later, when Trump hit pause on these higher tariffs for 90 days, aiming to create space for negotiations, he didn't include China, which continued to face the full brunt of the tariffs. China did not sit idly by, however. They raised tariffs on U.S. goods to a whopping 125%, starting April 12th, matching the U.S. tariffs. But as usual, they took it a step further.
China is retaliating again against the U.S. retaliation, so it's hard to tell who's retaliating in what way. But China's now saying they're at 125%, and Donald Trump saying that U.S. tariffs are on China at 145%.
They also restricted exports of rare earth elements, blacklisted several U.S. firms, and suspended imports from American agricultural and food producers. When President Trump announced a 20% tariff on European imports, the EU's initial reaction was more like a dignified shock. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen welcomed the 90-day pause, viewing it as a chance to stabilize the global economy. She talked about a zero-for-zero tariff agreement to eliminate industrial goods tariffs, hoping for smooth trades that were mutually beneficial.
Nonetheless, we stand ready to negotiate with the United States. Indeed, we have offered zero-for-zero tariffs for industrial goods as we have successfully done with many other trading partners.
However, she didn't address the European Union's very own countermeasures on autos, steel, and aluminum, indicating that while the EU is open to dialogue, it's also prepared to defend its own interests. On the other hand, Vietnam quickly threw in the towel. They were facing a potential 46% tariff and were almost begging, cap in hand, for harmonious trade relations. They showed their readiness to boost U.S. imports of U.S. food, gas, and tech products. They also sped up tariff cuts on U.S. imports like LNG, automobiles, timber, and agricultural products, hoping to avoid retaliatory tariffs. Now, Vietnam is looking like the teacher's pet of this whole saga. They're dodging the economic mess and confusion and possibly coming out with better trade terms and a gold star from Washington. That's some 4D chess of their own. For the ordinary American, it wasn't business as usual. The tariffs hit hard as prices of imported fruits, veggies, and other goods started inching up like they had somewhere more expensive to be. Even peanut butter and frozen shrimp weren't safe. But with the 90-day pause, prices didn't exactly fall, but they stopped playing with hearts and minds, at least temporarily. It was more complicated for American manufacturers. At first, they all welcomed the tariffs with hashtags like #MadeInAmerica. But not long after, reality checked in, because many of their parts and materials are imported, and now more expensive. So while they're saving on competition, they're bleeding cash on production. And during this suspension, they're basically holding their breath, waiting to see if their next shipment costs a little or a lot. The stock market had more mood swings than a teenager running on Monster Energy and zero sleep. At first, investors panicked, as they always do, but once the 90-day pause was announced, things calmed down a bit. This isn't the first time the U.S. has used tariffs as a tool in trade negotiations. In 1930, it's the Great Depression, breadlines, jazz, stock market hangovers, and Congress decides the best way to fix things is to raise tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods. Genius, right? Nope.
A lot of things made the Great Depression great or terrible, and the tariffs were certainly one of those.
That's not the way President Donald Trump tells it. He implies introducing the income tax in 1913 and lowering tariffs led to the Great Depression.
Then in 1929, it all came to a very abrupt end with the Great Depression, and it would have never happened if they had stayed with the tariff policy.
It made everything worse. Other countries retaliated. Global trade collapsed faster than your crypto portfolio, and the world spiraled deeper into economic misery. The only good thing that expanded was mutual resentment. In 2002, George Bush imposed tariffs up to 30% on imported steel to protect U.S. steelmakers. Under pressure from allies, industries, and the WTO, Bush dropped the tariffs after 21 months. In fact, Trump from 2018 to 2020 imposed wide-ranging tariffs, especially targeting China, the EU, Canada, and Mexico. Yes, even them. But even then, there were pauses, exemptions, and rollbacks. It wasn't always full throttle. So all this has happened before. Tariffs and temporary suspensions are like America's on-again, off-again relationship with global trade. They threaten, they retaliate, they pause, someone makes a speech, then it all starts over again. The question on everyone's lips now is, what next? As the 90-day suspension unfolds, the world watches closely. Will this period lead to meaningful resolutions and a new era of trade cooperation? Or is it merely a strategic pause before further escalation? In global trade, much like in chess, every move counts. The U.S. has made its move, and now the rest of the world must respond. Stay tuned as we continue to monitor this evolving situation. So, what do you think? Is this strategic genius or just another delayed tactic wrapped in a red, white, and blue bow tie? Is the U.S. playing 4D chess or just flipping the board when it doesn't like the score? Do drop your hot takes in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss an episode of all the global economic drama, explained without the boring bits.